Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we continue our Into the Spider Boot.
We need a better name.
Which we have now decided to rename Web of Remakes.
Ooh.
No, no. We'll think about it.
That's better.
As we continue with Spider-Man by Sam Raimi.
In 2002. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
And this episode, we are indeed continuing our continued untitled series of discussing every theatrically released or close to theatrically released, as per last episode, Spider-Man film. In this episode, obviously, as you can probably tell based on the title and the introduction, we are talking about the original Spider-Man movie from 2002. Directed by Sam Raimi, starring Tobey Maguire, who's apparently a piece of shit. This is going to be a real interesting one to talk about, actually. I'm very excited about this. Continuing on from last episode and the genuine dumpster fires of scripts that we read then, what was your take on Spider-Man?
So this was the first time I sort of came back to it in quite a while. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting coming at it from this perspective, because when I first watched it, it was probably not when it first came out, but shortly afterwards when I was old enough. And I still hadn't seen any real proper Spider-Man media except maybe the TV show. So with there as a young kid looking at it, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Coming at it now with history of Spider-Man comics and movies, and knowing how the rest of that trilogy plus all the reboots happen, looking at it now, I'm like, yeah, I can see it's still really enjoyable. It's still quite fun. It's not a cinematic masterpiece of any kind. It's quite dumb, but in a very good way, I think.
Endearingly so.
Endearingly, yes.
Yep. That's the tagline. Spider-Man, endearingly dumb.
I was a little thrown because, like, as a kid, I just focused on a lot of all the stuff designed for kids kind of thing. And looking at it now, I'm like, oh, this is like a family comedy mixed with a teen drama mixed with some sprinkled in with a few scenes of just real, like, actual horror.
Yeah.
Which is not to be surprised by knowing the director.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But it's just something I did not pick up on back then, and I'm looking at it now. I'm like, oh, this is weirdly more intense than I would have remembered.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. This is especially, I think it's a good idea pointing out the fact that we watched this originally as kids, because I was very much the same. I grew up, as I noted last episode, on the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s, and so this was my first live, big screen introduction to the character. I didn't see this film until just before Spider-Man 2 was about to come out. So I never saw it in cinemas or anything. I just saw it at home before I saw Spider-Man 2. And it freaked me out, honestly, a little bit at that age. I would have been only like maybe 7 or 8 years old. And I still remember how terrifying I found the bomb that turned all the people into skeletons on the balcony midway through the which I think is actually a really fun action sequence in many regards, like the creativity of the Macy Days parade. But oh boy, like some of the tonal stuff like really, really freaked me out as a kid. And I was the same. I hadn't seen this movie in quite some time, and so going back to see it again was like a genuine shot of nostalgia. And I honestly, it held up better than I expected. I think it's kind of really good. I think there's a lot of good elements to it. It feels really kind of, looking back at it now, it feels kind of classic and mythic in a way that the original Superman movie kind of did. That was the comparison that I wasn't really expecting to find, but it feels kind of old-fashioned, but in like a really appropriate way, I guess. Like when people talk about like the good old days of the original kind of classic Spider-Man comic book feel, like that's kind of the tone that I ended up getting from it, which I just didn't really expect. It's definitely not fantastic, but I was genuinely surprised by how how well it held up considering all of the context I was bringing to it watching it again today. So, yeah.
Yeah, as I was watching it recently in this rewatch, I realized how much of it is very grounded in a lot of very overplayed and hokey tropes and cliches, but it does it so earnestly and with such like a great deal of respect both to the source and to the audience that it doesn't like it isn't bad in any way.
Yeah.
You can still see it's hokey, but it just feels like it's part of the experience. And it's done in such like the entire scenes with William Dafoe as Green Goblin, where he's talking to himself as Harry Osborn and then back to Green Goblin, both the scene in the mirror or when he's talking to the mask.
You mean Norman Osborn?
Norman Osborn. Sorry, yes, Norman Osborn.
Yeah. No. We will get emails if we don't clarify that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, no. Norman Osborn and Green Goblin and doing their discussion. And if that was left for other movies, especially more modern movies, that would look so bad and be so terrible. But with this, there was just so much earnest to it. It felt right with the setting. It just made the Green Goblin a better villain than you would expect in most other films anyway.
Yep, then you would expect with the Power Rangers outfit that he's wearing for the whole movie, so...
I really like that costume, I think. That's one of the few, like, costumes... villain costumes that I really admire because it's quite distinct. It kept its heart to the comic but still made it look quite modern and realistic.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just an evil recoloring of the superheroes.
Look, the costume is an interesting thing. As a kid, honestly, I always thought it was like a little bit weird and silly. But watching it again this time, it didn't bother me as much that much. But I didn't know if that's just because I found the costume endearing or because it's actually better than I remembered it. The thing is, I don't think it's especially threatening. Like, I feel like Willem Dafoe's performance is so amazing and the costume kind of does a disservice to it because it's always just like... It's kind of obscuring his actual performance to a certain degree, which I don't think is necessarily beneficial, which I think is a little bit of a shame. But yeah, I don't know.
Whenever they tried to like lift up the visors and have his mouth coming through the bottom out, that looked weird.
Yeah.
I think it's just if it was fully up, like always Green Goblin-esque with the eyes covered and couldn't really see the mouth behind the giant open fang mouth, I think that looked intimidating and really cool. And when he became more honest, if they just removed that mask and just had it sort of be, or somehow just unblocking of his performance would have been fantastic. So yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing because I think that is one, especially in this era of superhero movies when like the X-Men are still wearing black leather, adapting that kind of costume to the big screen I think is really hard. Like, I mean, Amazing Spider-Man, like, you know, what's his name, 12 years later, did like an even worse job than it, and that was even midway through the MCU where like more heightened comic book costumes were kind of normalized to that point. Like, I don't think it's necessarily easy to adapt to the big screen. So I think it's like a decent effort, but if they were to bring back the Green Goblin into the MCU, which they definitely will one day, like, I do not see them doing this costume again. I think it'll be something radically different. So yeah. But no, back to your original point. I think you're making a really good point regarding tone, because I almost think it almost feels like the movie is embodying Peter Parker in an interesting way, and that it is just as earnest and dorky as he is, which I think is kind of appropriate. I think it kind of lacks the lighthearted charm or sincerity. There's a little bit of when he gets his powers and he's whooping and like jumping across rooftops and things like that. But the movie is also really dour through a lot of it as well. That I don't know if the tonal balance always incredibly works, but I think its heart is like it kind of in the right place, which I very much appreciated, especially for like a superhero movie in the early 2000s, like in the era of Daredevil and Elektra and Blade and all that jazz. Like the fact that this movie is good as it is like, I think, yeah, really fantastic. And I think Sam Raimi and David Coop as well, like, deserve credit for that. Absolutely. So
I absolutely feel with this movie, it's a pretty good Spider-Man movie. It's a really good Peter Parker movie.
Yeah. And I feel like that is embodied incredibly well in Tobey Maguire as well.
Yes.
In that he is a great uncharismatic Peter Parker, but he is a bad uncharismatic Spider-Man. Which is like, he never gets that dichotomy down right. Like he always just feels like an awkward nerd wearing spandex. whenever he's dressed as Spider-Man, which is just not the way Spider-Man should feel. Like, Spider-Man should literally be like an embodiment of like a liberating kind of ideal character version of what Peter Parker wants to be in his normal life, who's like snarky and like witty, and incredibly charismatic and just so much more full of life than Peter Parker is ever able to be. But that dichotomy is really never present in the film at all, in any of these films, I think. And I think it largely comes down to his performance, even if I think he makes a good, very dorky Peter Parker. Especially in the opening scene, like he looks like he just walked straight out of the original comic book. So
the casting choices were all very interesting in this movie, I think. We've talked about Toby, but there's also James Franco as Harry Osborn.
Yeah.
Who is, like, aside how I feel about him as a person, I actually think he did a pretty good job as Harry.
Yeah.
Especially in the first, like, third, where he was just playing the slightly cooler friend of the nerd.
Peter, and then the cooler Peter.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And just playing the rich kid who's trying to, like, not be too embarrassing kind of thing. It's like, we drop me off around the corner. Don't make a big deal about the place where, it's setting up for us. And don't talk about how I'm dating MJ kind of thing.
Yeah.
That, I think, works really well. It gets a little strained when Harry tries to act incredibly upset. I do think, especially in the last third of the film.
Look, the melodramatic aspects
are
like hands down the weakest thing in almost all three movies, I think. And I think a little bit of that is right. You're right, is kind of at the fore, especially in the last third of this movie. So,
but aside from that, I think he did a really good job and worked really well alongside William Dafoe playing Norman Osborn, who, as we talked about, was fantastic.
So good, just perfect casting.
Yes.
His face looks like the original Green Goblin mask. Like, it's almost no, but like legitimately though, right? Like they could have put him in makeup and that could have been the face. Like it's so perfect. And that's not a slight against Willem Dafoe. I think he's an incredible actor. He's still doing great work these days. People should check out The Lighthouse at some point too. Very different movie to this though. But he is like, I don't know. I just like perfect casting. I found it really hard to imagine anyone else in the role of Norman Osborn after seeing him in this again, frankly. Yeah.
That shot of him jumping out of the vapor chamber.
Yeah.
And giving the most comic-y look.
Yeah! yeah. It's so... He goes all in as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I was reading a couple of interviews with him, but apparently he had a great time on set with this. Like, he petitioned for the role. He wasn't originally being considered for it, but he ended up getting it. He had a great time on set. He did like 90% of his own stunts, and he had such a great experience.
Which is part of the reason...
Oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
I would say him doing his stunts was part of the reason why the Green Goblin outfit looks like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's crazy, like, the fact that he got involved so much with his character. And he had such a great experience that he wanted to come back for the next movie, even though his character was dead. Which he does in, like, flashback form, or, like, weird ghost form. But still, like, yeah, really good stuff.
Yeah. And then we have Kirsten Dunst.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
See, this is the thing, like, since I watched this movie when I was so young, that's, like, that was Mary Jane to me, but, like, she's not given any favors.
No.
I mean, let's be real, she gets saved twice in this movie, and I'm pretty sure half of her lines are just screaming or yelling Spider-Man help, so, like, you know, I mean, this is a problem with a lot of comic book stories, I feel, but, like, the female love interest is very rarely an interesting character just because they're not allowed to be. They're always defined in relation to the male character. And, like, sure, like, that's obviously... There are plenty of exceptions to that rule, and a lot of really interesting characters have come out of comics in that were originally part of that template. I think Gwen Stacy is a great example, especially the way Gwen Stacy is used today. But, like, Mary Jane in this movie just doesn't escape that damsel in distress, pining after the hero role at all. Like, I don't think there's anything really notable about her performance or the way the character is written. So, yeah.
Agree with you on basically all those points. She couldn't really perform well because there wasn't much to perform in that she did. I mean, look, she's a good actress, just not in this.
Yeah, she's been good in other stuff as well. Like, this is definitely not a slight against Kirsten Dunst. It's just like, like, the role just doesn't do her any favors.
How would you feel if it was Elizabeth Banks? Because She was originally, I think, for that role, and then got moved to Betty Brant.
Yeah, she was. I think she would have been good as well. I don't know if she would have had any more luck than Kirsten Dunst at the very least. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, she definitely would have been interesting. I can't imagine Elizabeth Banks in with red hair, honestly.
Yeah, that
Yep.
is a bit of a struggle.
That's maybe a
for
thing.
me.
Yep. And that's like for many, yeah. Like I don't know, that would be a little bit weird. And also because like since I've seen Elizabeth Banks in so many other things, that like I think of her in like Pitch Perfect and stuff like that as well. Didn't she direct Pitch Perfect as well? Something like that. I think she was involved creatively. But I could be mistaken.
Might have been the sequel. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe one or the other. But whereas in like Kirsten Dunst is just like that was Mary Jane to me growing up. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to distinguish essentially. So well, at the very least, we can definitely start talking about some of the context around this movie because I think this is the other thing that I really liked looking at this now because this movie feels like such a when I was watching it was like fresh and new. It was the first M-rated movie I'd ever seen, and it just felt like so. Like crazy, like, whoa, this is the way cinema is now and things like that. And looking back at it now, I'm like, geez, this is such a time capsule, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's so very much of the era, not only like regarding superhero movies, as we talk, like X-Men came out a couple of years before.
Yeah.
This movie was in production hell for ages. It draws quite a bit from the James Cameron script that we talked about last week.
Yes.
That was, when Sony bought the rights to make this movie, bought the credit on Cameron's script, but they didn't buy the credit on the original canon film script. The one with Doc Ock who says okie dokie a bunch. Which, like, and I think that kind of shows in the final product.
Yes.
The other thing as well, I didn't realize at the time, because obviously as a kid I wasn't aware, but like how much this movie was affected by 9/11. By like,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of movies were at the time specifically, but like parts of this were reshot. There's a really famous ad or trailer that was released before the film came out that shows a plane being caught in a web between the Twin Towers that was aired before 9/11 happened and then had to be removed. There's like a poster with like Spider-Man's eyes reflecting the Twin Towers because obviously, you know, being so representative of New York. And then they added a couple of scenes and like bits and pieces in the final movie to like make it more patriotic. Like there's that scene when he's posing against the American flag at the very end. There's a scene on the bridge when like New Yorkers are throwing rubbish at the Green Goblin saying, hey, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of New York. Hey, I'm walking here.
Yeah.
Which like, sure. All right. I thought that scene was endearing enough at the very least, but like, still a curious.
I thought it was, some of the other patriotic stuff I didn't care for, but that scene of the throwing rubbish, I feel was actually something that a lot of the other Spider-Man films, looking at you, Andrew Garfield, missed is the fact that, like, Spider-Man, his spider abilities are like a curse to him, but a gift to everyone else. Like, he's one of the few superheroes where the police, although briefly having to, like, deal with a vigilante, are basically like, he's cool.
Sometimes.
Yeah, something from the comics, which is quite prevalent in this film because of scenes like that, where it's just like, actually, this is the Spider-Man I sort of know. And it's so different from a lot of the others, like your Batmans and your X-Men, where they're all very, like, in the shadows, the public hate them, etc. And this one is explicitly, no, this is like, Spider-Man is for the people. He is a blessing to everyone except himself.
I mean, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, like, it's right in the name.
Yeah.
Like, he embodies literally the idealized, like, kind of New York that looks out for its own kind of thing, necessarily. Like, he's so intimately tied to that culture. Yeah, which, I think you're absolutely right. I think that scene kind of embodies that in an appropriate way. I just thought it was strange that they saw 9/11 happen and they decided to add that in because of that, but I think it fits. I think it still works. Regarding like the kind of the basis for the movie as well, as we kind of noted, like it drew a bit of inspiration from Cameron's scriptment. I'd recommend listening to the previous episode we did on that if you want more details on that.
There are some scenes where it's very clear that it's taken from the scriptment, like Green Goblin's whole take on how people should rise up, how people like them should rise above the common folk. That is like taken straight from the scriptment.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
Join me, bud. We're not so different, you and I. Like that whole conversation. The whole metaphor for puberty as well is like drawn wholesale. As we kind of noted in the previous episode, there's literally a line in that script that says, I hope people get that this is a metaphor for puberty. And we did, James Cameron. Good job.
And there was that great, I think they actually got the scene, that one of the scenes that I hated in the script a lot, that whole everyone thinks Spider-Man is one of them kind of thing.
Yeah.
They actually kind of managed to do that well by just having a lot of people talk about the myth of the Spider-Man in like little news clips and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like,
Thankfully, it wasn't like people trying to, own Spider-Man as their own, but it was all kind of like the conspiracy theories around him, essentially, which I think really worked.
yeah.
Yeah.
And just the fact that it's like, it was clear that no one knows what he is, but they're like, yeah, he seems to be doing all right.
Yeah.
I'm glad he's around.
He's getting by. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, like, obviously it drew from that script quite a bit as well. David Koepp gets the final credit, but really there were 4 writers on it. Just all of the others, James Cameron included, just kind of rescinded their right to getting credit for it. It reportedly draws quite a bit from Ultimate Spider-Man 1 and 2, because Ultimate Spider-Man, or like the Ultimate Universe, which for people aren't familiar, was like I don't really know, spin-off is the right word, but like an Elseworlds version of the Marvel Universe that streamlined its continuity and just make it really accessible to new readers. That started in 2000 with Ultimate Spider-Man. The timeline for that is a little bit shaky, considering they started shooting in like early, in like the beginning of 2000, and like Ultimate Spider-Man was released that same year. I really don't know how much inspiration it has on the script. But there are definitely a lot of similarities. Like Ultimate Spider-Man retells the origin in a way that is very, very similar to the film, almost like kind of scene for scene when he's first climbing that wall and all that as well. So I mean, like there are definitely comparisons there. I just don't know how much of it was intentional or how much like they were just kind of unintentionally echoing each other. So yeah.
Well, there was also, it drew a lot of inspiration from a lot of the early run of the Amazing Spider-Man series back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Which is definitely not a coincidence, given how much of a comic book fan Sam Raimi is.
Absolutely. I didn't realize this, but apparently he has like a collection like 25,000 comics or something, which is one of the reasons he was chosen to make this movie. Yeah. Which is great. Good for him.
And there's a lot of it where it is very much just straight from the first few issues of the Amazing Spider-Man they could have taken wholesale out of.
Yep, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, no, my mistake. I misaligned the timeline a little bit. I think they started early in 2001. So the first few issues of Ultimate Spider-Man probably did come out at the same time that Koepp was writing the script. But even so, it's like, it's kind of tight. Yeah, definitely an interesting point, though. I didn't realize Ultimate Spider-Man came out that early, honestly. I mean, obviously, production was affected because of 9/11 and all that jazz, particularly the promotional material all around it as well. Amusingly, Topher Grace was going to be considered for the role of Peter Parker.
Yes.
Which is appropriate when he gets cast as Venom 2 movies later. So, even if I don't know if he was a great fit for Venom, but we'll get to that in a later episode. And then Flash Thompson plays a less prominent role in this than he does in the both original 2 scripts as well, which I thought was interesting, but like I think it works well enough. Played by Joe Manganiello, who would go on to play Deathstroke.
I think this was his first major feature film.
One of his first, absolutely. So it's just really, really weird in hindsight. So yeah, it's strange.
And it was apparently a couple of the production guys tried to pay him $100 to actually punch Tobey Maguire in the face.
I heard about that. Yeah. I mentioned this up top, but Tobey Maguire, apparently not a great guy at all. If anyone has seen Molly's Game, there is a character in that played by Michael Cera called Player X or something like that, who in real life was Tobey Maguire, and he's just apparently a real kind of disgusting, manipulative guy who feuded with a lot of people on set, including, what's his name? Harry Osborn. What was his name?
James Franco.
I can't believe I forgot his name for a second there. Because he called him Frogface during an interview or something, and it started a rivalry between the two of them, which is kind of funny. And then he also, reportedly faked a back injury so that he could be paid more for the sequel to, go against his original contract and all that jazz. So, yeah, it's a whole thing. I think he's a good Peter Parker, but, I don't know. A bit weird.
More reason for me to think Topher Grace should have played the part.
I would have been curious to see what he was like.
Yeah.
I think Look, I haven't seen Topher Grace in that much stuff. I think he's a good actor. He's really good on Black Klansman. Granted, he's playing the head of the Ku Klux Klan in that movie. But reportedly,
he's also very good in Black Mirror.
Oh yeah, he is as well. I forgot about him in that. Reportedly, he's really funny on that 70s show. I feel like I don't know. I feel like he would have almost leaned towards more Andrew Garfield. That he would have been less of a dork, but therefore a more charismatic Spider-Man, possibly. But I mean, look. Who can say?
I don't know. He's a pretty big dork in that 70s show. So.
Sure. I have not seen that 70s show, so I would not know.
Okay.
Yeah, but either way, look, it would have been an interesting alternate history. But I think he would have done a good job. So cool. I'm just going through my notes regarding the rest of the film. I think it is a really interesting point, specifically talking about the context too. Is that Danny Elfman does the score for this movie, who also famously did the Batman score from Batman '89, which like reinvigorated the superhero genre for like the 90s going into the 2000s. Like so many movies wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the success of Batman '89. Great score as well. Like I don't know if it's appropriate to Spider-Man per se, because it's just so like mythic or melodramatic, but oh man, it still gives me shivers listening to it these days.
Yeah, that one scene where he starts climbing up the wall and it's all in time with the music.
Yep.
Just as it starts coming in. Oh, that's good.
Oh, it's good stuff. Good stuff. I think it's a lot of nice touches like that. And considering this movie is like almost 20 years old, which is just terrifying to think about, the special effects like look still okay. Like not great. You can definitely always notice when they swap out like the real person for the CGI person. But for like early 2000s, Jesus Christ, like that technology must have been cutting edge. Reportedly, Sam Raimi showed a cut of the film to a few of the studio heads at the time at Sony, and they thought a couple of the CGI actors was actually Tobey Maguire doing the stunts. Like, didn't realize that it was. Oh wow! It was CGI. So like, obviously has dated the movie a little bit, but I think for the time it would have been very, very impressive. I didn't notice it. I didn't notice how CGI it was when I saw it as a kid.
Yes, as a kid, I did see it. But even as a kid, I did see it. You got scared by the skeletons from the exploding pumpkin bomb. Yeah. Even as a kid, was laughing my head off because that was just...
What? Yeah, watching it now, it didn't have the same effect because I'm like, ooh, spooky, scary skeletons.
Skeletons and shivers
down your spine. That's all I could think of when those like cartoonish skeletons showed up on screen. So, so dumb. So Sam Raimi as well. So this is the other thing. I had no idea who Sam Raimi was as a kid. But now that I've seen like the Evil Dead trilogy recently and all that as well. Great movies, I'd recommend them. That like he's such a curious choice for Spider-Man, but I think it really kind of works. Like I think the balance of tonal stuff, he doesn't shy away from hamminess and like sincerity, which I think is kind of appropriate.
Yep.
And every now and then you get like a weird kind of really silly horror element to it. So like obviously you have the Willem Dafoe talking in the mirror with an evil version of himself with bad teeth. You've got the original Green Goblin scene when, like, you know, he jumps on the thing and goes, ah! You've got, like, the pumpkin bomb, all that jazz. Like, even the third act as well, like, gets really freaking violent and gory at some points. Like, that glider freaked me out when I was a kid as well, so... God damn. Yeah.
And that entire scene in the burning building where it's like, I'll save you, young lady. Ha! It was the Green Goblin all along.
Yeah, exactly. That scene and the scene when the Green Goblin terrifies Aunt May are the two scenes that I'm like, oh, okay, this suit could be really spooky in certain contexts. But it just never lasted long enough for me. Yeah, but no, like, I think I do find it really interesting watching this movie now when you can kind of see his fingerprints over it in a way that I didn't realize so much. Which I think is fun. I think he's a good director of these three movies, so it works.
Yeah, it does. And it, again, helps that he's a major comic fan, because there was references assumed throughout this movie. Like, the whole scene where he's designing the spider suit for the wrestling match, and pulls out all the different designs, and there's, like, it's designs for other heroes. There's the classic design of the black symbiote suit. Was in there, but like to its original lesser known design.
Yeah. Basically. When it's like pure black with the white logo in the middle and all that.
No. The pure black with the red.
Oh,
logo.
That's right. The red. Yeah, no, of course. I remember noticing that. Yeah.
Going all the way back to Randy Schuler's original design for that.
Yep.
Which like didn't even properly get a good run until after the movie came out. It was like only a few years ago, I think they had a little one shot where it was the original story that came out for the original suit.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you want to learn more about that, I have, like I do with every time we talk about comics, go see Comic Drake. He does a great video on that particular suit. But yes, the original symbiote suit was there.
A costume for Stingray as well, I think, which is another comic character. Yeah.
And Black Widow's logo.
Oh, yeah. I noticed that one too. Yep. There is that scene when, reportedly this wasn't Sam Raimi, but Tobey Maguire ad-libbing it, but when he's trying to get the web to shoot for the first time, he's like, Alakazam, fly, Shazam. Obviously Shazam being Captain Marvel. He says up and away web, like Superman, like stuff like that, which is kind of funny. So, There's a couple of like
and throwing out the demon horns, which is so very 2000s kid movie, where it just pauses and then moves a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Just flings it up and down. Yeah, that was quite funny.
Yeah.
So, yep. This is the thing. I remember this movie being so dour thinking about it now, but watching it, I'm like, oh, okay, this is actually kind of fun and dorky sometimes in a way that Spider-Man should be. Like, this is an argument that I'm probably going to make throughout this whole series of films, but like, I always feel like Spider-Man is like kind of a tragedy masquerading as a fun action comedy, essentially. Like there is always Peter Parker almost ends every single story like worse off in some way, and he is always worse off for being Spider-Man than not being Spider-Man. Like in this, he loses Uncle Ben. Like obviously Norman gets murdered, everything like that. It's like that's accentuated in all of the other sequels as well. Like I think it should be a joy to necessarily be Spider-Man, but ultimately it is like. Yeah, like perpetually tinged with tragedy. Like one of Spider-Man's most iconic stories is about his Spider-Man accidentally murdering his girlfriend at the time. So, which was going to be an original take on this movie. What's his name? David Fincher was attached to direct at some point, and he wanted to do the origin story in the opening credits and then base the film on the death of Gwen Stacy, which I think would have been a really interesting choice. Yes. And for people who are not familiar, Gwen Stacy in the comics basically is what happens to Mary Jane at the end of this movie, where Green Goblin throws her off the Manhattan Bridge. But when Spider-Man tries to stop her with web, he accidentally breaks her neck. So, which is like brutal even now. Like I remember reading that comic again a little while ago, and like the snap that you see when she like kind of twists back, like Jesus Christ, man, putting that in the comic at the time is gutsy. Yeah, but I think it's one of those stories that kind of captures the ethos of Spider-Man as ultimately a tragic figure in many ways.
Like I said earlier, it's a blessing for everyone else and a curse for him.
Yeah,
The whole Spider-Man.
Exactly. So like,
I mean, hell, one of my favorite Spider-Man stories is the Superior Spider-Man, where Doc Ock takes over his body and basically rebuilds his life because, like, Doc Ock, that's his body now. He's gonna finish the PhD for Parker, sets up Parker Industries, makes a huge, massive industry and a huge amount of money for Parker. And then eventually Parker regains control of his body. And one of the first things that happens is he loses his PhD because they decided it must be a plagiarized version of Dr. Octavius's work.
Yep, of course.
Because it was written by Dr. Octavius.
Exactly.
And he just loses everything almost immediately because Peter Parker can't have nice things.
Yeah, blatantly. Like, he's always getting punched to the ground. That's the thing. Like, any, like, positive slant to Peter Parker's life, like, his marriage, he sells to a demon to, like, you know, get his identity back and save Aunt May. And has been murdered in so many different storylines as well. Like, all of his friends ends up dead. He ends up ostracized from everybody else. Like, it's just, things always end up crappy. Hell, there's even, like, there was a Dark Knight Returns-esque version of a Spider-Man story when he accidentally, this is like in the future where Peter Parker is really old, and he marries Mary Jane, and then Mary Jane dies from cancer thanks to his radioactive sperm. Yeah. That is not something I'm making up. That is an actual comic arc that someone has written about Spider-Man.
Yes.
I mean, like, Jesus, dude, give Peter Parker a break.
And, like, if you're in that world, the best thing to turn your life around is apparently just to leave Peter Parker. So you have Eddie Brock, who was Venom, and twisted by his jealousy and the Venom symbiote to become an evil killing machine, eventually goes off, becomes anti-Venom, that cures cancer in people.
Yep.
The symbiote attaches itself to Flash Thompson, a former bully turned into another superhero called Agent Venom.
Agent Venom is a great comic line as well that I'd recommend.
Yes,
too.
it is.
Yeah, big fan.
Basically, everyone goes off to do better and bigger things as soon as they leave Parker's life.
As soon as they leave Peter alone. Like, I mean, it's the one...
Yeah.
It's, like, people talk about it all, like, he references it all the time in the comics, but that classic Parker luck. Like, he's perpetually unlucky. And, like, I think this movie does this whole trilogy, I think Sam Raimi really gets that being Peter Parker and being Spider-Man really sucks.
Yeah.
And he's constantly struggling and people dying around him and everything like that. While also balancing it with, like, the genuine joy of being able to jump across rooftops and things like that. Like, I think it's a really interesting tonal balance that, even though I think the tone, not everything in this movie works tonally, like, I think it gets that part a lot better than I expected. So, yeah, a lot better than I remembered, at the very least. So, yeah, it's good. It's good. And I really think it's a
Yes.
thing that some of the later movies, even if I really like them, actually end up forgetting. But we'll get to that in time. So Bruce Campbell shows up, which is obviously like Sam
Yes.
Raimi mark as well. He shows up in all 3 movies playing apparently a different character. I'm going to preface this now, but reportedly Spider-Man 4, the original pitch for that was going to have Mysterio being arrested at the very beginning, and it turned out to be Bruce Campbell, which means I just love the idea that theoretically it's the same guy in every single movie, just jumping between careers. Like, so in this he's a
ring announcer.
ring announcer. That's
ring
the one.
announcer.
Yep. At the second one, he's at is he at the theater? Or is that the third? No, I think he's at the theater in the third. In the second movie,
The second one, he's a waiter.
He's the waiter. He's the waiter at the French restaurant. And then the third movie, he's what's the name of the theater ticket inspector that doesn't let Peter in. So, yeah, it's fun. I don't know. I just like Bruce Campbell showing up.
He was the original Stan Lee.
Yeah, basically.
Although Stan Lee also has a cameo.
I was about to
in
say
all
he
of
also shows up in the even though he doesn't say anything.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
which was a shame, but still nice to see him. So, yeah, it's good.
Yes. I will also happily talk about a wrestling scene ad nauseum.
Of course.
Because it's Spider-Man meets wrestling.
Yeah, no, I know. He's played by an actual wrestler, isn't it? What's his name?
Yes, Macho Man Randy Savage.
That's the one. Yeah. Bonesaw. Yep.
Yes.
Fun performance, fun scene, except for all the homophobia, but outside of that.
Yeah, but that fits with Spider-Man's terrible dorky character.
Yeah, true. Look, he definitely throws out the lame jokes, that's for sure.
Yes.
So
I mean, I do have some annoyances in the fact that Bonesaw is in apparently 3 matches, all of them different with undefined rules.
Mm-hmm.
The first one seems to be a normal match where he wins with Randy Savage's actual finisher, the top rope elbow,
Oh, cool.
and goes for a pin. The second one apparently is either a table match or an over-the-top rope match because he wins just by tossing a guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then randomly it's a steel cage that he loses against Peter Parker just by knockout, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, because why not?
Which, like, honestly, for an independent wrestling show, that may just be factually accurate.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they
As well as the sleazy promoter.
yeah, they were also just putting random people in the ring to fight him, so I don't know if they were
Yes.
that concerned about consistency. So I don't know if that would
fair.
typically happen. Yeah, fun scene though at the very least, and that one comes straight
Yes.
from the original comics as well. Like Peter Parker always goes through his
Yeah.
slant. This is in the original both scripts as well, where he like uses his abilities to make money for a period of time. In the original script, I think they were originally going to have what's the name, Peter Parker go through this whole like media career, essentially becoming like kind of the sensational Spider-Man, going on talk shows and wrestling and things like that. But they streamlined it down for the film for just being that one wrestling match. Which immediately afterwards he fails to stop Uncle Ben's killer, which like streamlined I think works really well. So
Yes.
in general, honestly, if we want to talk about the comics briefly as well, even though we've touched on them, like it is really accurate, like surprisingly spot on from like point to point. Like they mix around the Green Goblin origin a little bit in the original comics. He kills his partner. Was it Melvin? I don't remember his name. Anyway, he becomes a supervillain in the comics in his own right, but he kills him to basically take over the company and then accidentally ingest the Goblin formula via accident. Like, he doesn't commit it to himself in the way that he does in the film, which I guess is like try to make him more sympathetic, especially the double identity kind of works for that regard as well. So I think all of those changes work really too. I think the ethos of the Green Goblin kind of stays the same as well. I do find it strange that he's the head of this massive, incredibly wealthy company living in a penthouse in New York, and he's worried about losing funding on this one specific project to the point that he's going to test him himself. I don't know. Maybe I just don't have sympathy for rich people, but I just thought that was kind of a
that
weird
is sort of,
point.
if anything, the main villain of this entire movie is capitalism and
Is
consumerism.
money. Yeah, it's true. This is.
I mean-
yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, it's the bad guys who were like the conference who tried to kick him out of his own company. It's J. Jonah Jameson in a way, the way he treats and makes, in that famous line of, if he doesn't want to be famous, I'll make him infamous kind of way.
Yep.
Everything is all very money-based.
Yeah, the system is perpetually stacked against Peter Parker
Yes.
and Spider-Man in general, which is like always been a really big part of the comic as well. So, I think there is a weird thing, especially in these movies. Like if you want to talk about era, the fact that this came out after 9/11, this is more prominent in Spider-Man 2 as well. But there is kind of there was a kind of a theme in a lot of these movies that valorizes poverty to a certain extent. Like this movie does it, and the sequels do it as well, in that Peter is like almost kind of idolized in a neoliberal kind of way, where he's using his specific skills to make his way in the world. He refuses to accept a handout from Norman Osborn. He's living in a crappy apartment with his friend, like that kind of thing, and he's seen as a virtuous person for life crapping on him, which is like an ideological thing that I don't like, for obvious reasons, I think, but is like also not incredibly, like it's a constant joke that Peter's like dirt poor in the comics and can't afford like a decent apartment and things like that. And that's the thing, we if we want to joke, capitalism is kind of the villain of so many Spider-Man comics, because if Peter was not always struggling to make rent and work multiple jobs, imagine how many other people he would be saving. Imagine how much more stable his life would be. Like, what's the name? Being Spider-Man and not making money out of being Spider-Man turns his life into a constant living hell for that reason, because he's not trying to monetize it, which means he's being punished for not necessarily like in the pure ideological like kind of neoliberal world, Peter would go out, make a bunch of money from wrestling, and like just go on media talk shows and just like exploit his gifts for profit essentially. But that's not the path that he goes, and because of that, he's punished for it, but he's also valorized for it at the same time. So I don't know, weird, interesting things. Yeah. But all those elements are all through the comics as well. I mean, hell, there's literally a mission in Spider-Man PS4 where you have to go find all of your leftover stuff in a dump truck because you've just been evicted from your apartment because you weren't able to pay rent. So, yeah, very much on brand for the character at the very least. So, but anyway, Spider-Man shouldn't be poor. He should be allowed to be Spider-Man on his own time. If universal basic income was a thing and he could afford to pay all of his stuff, he could be Spider-Man all the time. That's all I'm saying. The person who died in a burning building, that's on you, capitalism. Anyway.
So you're saying this is what you would do to fix Spider-Man? How you would do it differently?
Ah, very good. We didn't even set that one up. Nice. No. Jingle. Honestly, I didn't really have a lot for this, so you can go first if you want to.
Sure. I sort of, my first point I already brought up, but I would actually like to have Topher Grace play Spider-Man.
Sure, yeah.
And then have Tobey Maguire come in the third movie as Venom. It seems to fit their personalities better anyway.
I like that a lot, actually. I like that a lot. I don't know if Tobey Maguire would have like the menace to pull off Venom, but he's definitely a douche enough of a person to do it. Yeah,
aside from that, there's not a whole lot I can think of changing. I probably that final fight scene, I'd make it a bit clearer, not just in terms of script, but in terms of like, let me see things.
Sure.
Yep. And like, it was a great scene of like Peter's anger taking over, but it was so like underplayed. Like, so that third act I'd probably sort of change around a bit, especially the end. And when he just sort of drops Norman dead back in his base, sees Harry, and then just pisses off. Like, I understand why they're doing that, but I feel that could have also been done a lot better and still led for a nice sequel hook.
Yep. Yeah. Maybe explain just a little bit more.
Yes.
Like, hey, your father killed himself or something. I don't know. Not me.
I tried to save him, but the goblin killed him.
Yep.
Bye.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And I'd probably, give Mary Jane a lot more. Like, give her that spunk that she has in the comics.
Oh, she's very sassy in the comics. Yeah, and none of that is on display here. She has no personality.
No. You have to go through a whole, script rewrite in order to do that, so I won't do that right now. But yes, she needs a lot more to work with. Hell, if you can somehow incorporate the Black Cat into this series, so she can actually have, a proper sort of, not just romantic, but actual, someone to stand up against.
Yep. A romantic interest for Spider-Man as opposed to Peter Parker. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Kind of thing. I reckon that would be interesting. Hell, make Mary Jane what she is in the comics as a superhero. Make her the new Black Cat.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm surprised that hasn't happened before. That Mary Jane has never been made Black Cat in that way. But I mean, I guess Felicia Hardy's character in her own right, so...
it's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. No, good stuff.
Yeah, that's basically what I would do.
I mean, Yeah, awesome. Honestly, my Do It Differently was almost what the studio did, in that I just want David Fincher to make a Spider-Man movie. I just want to see what that was like. If he wants to make it out of the death of Gwen Stacy and make it horrifyingly grimdark, sure, go for your life, man. Don't care. I just want to see it. I don't know. Like, I just can't imagine David. I don't think it would be a good representation of the comics at all. I don't think it'll really fit in with so many of the other superhero movies at the time. I think the tone will be totally different. But just like as a weird experiment, like I'd just be really, really curious to see what his take on the character would be. Especially after he made like Seven and Fight Club in the 90s. Like, imagine if the next movie David Fincher made after Fight Club was Spider-Man. Look, I don't know if it'd be any good. I could potentially hate it, but I'd just be really curious to see what that would be like.
Imagine Green Goblin talking to himself, but as Brad Pitt.
yeah, basically they redo the twist from Fight Club, but with the Green Goblin. Yeah. Why not? I think that'd be really interesting to see. Maybe not adapt the death of Gwen Stacy, and that I just feel that's they kind of do it in this movie. They do it in Amazing Spider-Man 2 as well. Mm-hmm. And also, like, it's not necessarily fridging the girlfriend per se, because, like, what's her name? Gwen Stacy was, like, an established character before that, but it also fits into a tradition in superhero comics that is not always great. So, I don't know. I would be... honestly, if I wanted to see David Fincher adapt any Spider-Man storyline, I would love to see him do Kraven's The Last Hunt. I think that would be amazing, because it's definitely one of the darker Spider-Man stories. It's got some messed up stuff in it, which is like really appropriate for David Fincher, I think. So, I think that'd be a really, really interesting like story to adapt, because I don't think we'll ever see it on screen. I think it's too brutal, basically. Like, it ends with like a suicide. A bunch of people die. He buries Spider-Man alive, and it's just a whole thing. Great storyline though. And I think David Fincher's Kraven the Last Hunt would be wild. Somewhere in the Spider-Verse, I'm sure that movie exists, and I would love to see it.
That does sound really fantastic. I would love to see Fincher do it, although every time you kept saying Kraven's Last Hunt, it honestly sounded like you saying Wes Craven's Last Hunt. And now I just want to see Spider-Man meets Freddy Krueger.
I want to see Wes Craven direct a Spider-Man movie too. Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah.
That'd be... Look, I don't even have a less of an idea than that what that would look like, but...
I feel that has something to do with Mysterio, honestly.
Yeah, probably, actually.
It plays with the whole dreamscape thing.
Yep, totally. Yep. Real illusions or something like that. Even if I do love the version of Mysterio we eventually got.
Yes.
But yeah, cool. All right, anyway, what have you got to recommend us to cap off this second episode of Web of Reboots, Ev?
Well, given that it seems like with this film and this film series... if you want a really good family-friendly superhero movie with some exciting moments in it, you really want to go for a B-grade horror director.
Uh-huh.
Which is why I'm recommending Shazam.
Not the direction I expected, but yeah, sure, I can see the parallels.
But it is another family-friendly superhero movie starring a teenage superhero, and is sort of a bit of a metaphor for puberty.
Yeah.
And discovering your family and such.
Absolutely.
And is also directed by a B-grade horror director who does a surprisingly good job.
Yeah, there you go. We have a mini shift on Shazam that you can listen to right now. So
yes.
There you go. Definitely recommend that. And yeah, I'd second that too. Shazam's quite a charming movie. I haven't seen it since we saw it in cinemas, but I remember quite enjoying it. So,
including one particular incredibly horrifying scene.
Yeah, actually. This once again has its own skeleton scene, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Spooky, scary, evil sins come eating up your face. Good stuff. God, I forgot about all the horror elements in that movie. It's weird as hell in hindsight. Anyway, well, I mean, for me, I was just going to recommend the Evil Dead trilogy.
Yes.
I mean, if we're talking about Sam Raimi, so like, these are real interesting B-grade, low-budget, really kind of hammy, schlocky horror movies from the 80s and early 90s, that I think are very interesting films. Army of Darkness, especially the third one, which involves, Bruce Campbell playing the lead character, getting sent back to, like, Arthurian times and has to fight a bunch of zombies with knights. It's just so silly and so much fun at the same time. I enjoy those movies a lot. And I think, especially if you've seen the original Spider-Man films, you haven't seen anything else Sam Raimi has made, I think you're going to see some interesting parallels that you may not have expected. So, yeah, I definitely recommend those films. They're really, really good. Really held up. Horror, still horror movies, especially the first two. And someone does get raped
Yes.
by a tree at some point, so expect that. But still really interesting films. So, yeah. Cool. Well, next episode, I don't even think we need to tease it, because I think you can guess what we're going to be doing. I'm very excited to look back at that one. Oh boy. I mean, look, I have nostalgia for Spider-Man 1, but Spider-Man 2 is where it is at. Oh boy, I'm so excited to watch this movie again. So thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be emailed at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send in your, I don't know, Spider-Man costume designs. There are some really cool ones out there, so...
If there's any horror director you'd want to see tackle Spider-Man, let us know.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. What horror director would you get to direct Spider-Man? You know what? I would like to see a Miles Morales movie directed by,
Jordan Peele.
Jordan Peele, there we go. I was about to say the guy behind
Yeah.
Get Out, and I couldn't remember his name. That'd be good. But I mean, also, let
Yes.
Jordan Peele do whatever he wants. So, you know,
Yeah.
either way. But until then, fare thee well.
Thwip.